Hello, this is Kathleen McKee of Oleens.com, Machine Embroidery Art.
Editing closed paths or region sew areas. As with the line sew, with all the options to change it, the region sew has just as many, if not more, options for changing its appearance or what it does. But first of all, we're going to just change the closed path area itself the same way we did the line sew, by adding points or moving points. You can right click and delete a point. You can select a point and change it to a straight as opposed to a curved. So there's all kinds of ways you can edit the shape that way. You can also change the direction of the stitches by moving the little arrow there, or under the sewing attributes, the direction circle here. But the main way we change our region sew area is by the little pull down tabs, and we can choose to have no area sewn at all. I'm going to remove the undersewing on the region sew so we can see what's going on better behind the stitches. Like this line right here. I don't know why it's the default to have the running stitch path go right through the middle of it. I always select this in most cases. Same on this one here. Let's get rid of the undersewing so you can see what's going on, and let's remove the stitch running path. But with the pull down menu, we can change this fill stitch to not sewn, as we had mentioned. It can be a satin stitch. However, what are all these little lines going on here? These are showing you where the machine is going to lay down a stitch, because the software and your machines don't like to make a stitch any longer than 10 millimeters, and if it is, they're going to drop a stitch down wherever they think it should be. Look at this in realistic preview. You can see it doesn't show up so good that close up, but further away you can see where it's going to drop a stitch. So we can tell by measuring it. Now look down into this area here as I click and drag, and you're going to see that it's 56 millimeters. It's way too long for a satin stitch, so we're going to have to change that to either a fill stitch, which we just had, or next is a programmable fill stitch. There are so many programmable fill stitches. Whenever you choose programmable fill stitch, you're going to be looking for a little folder, just like we did with the motif stitches under the line sew. But with the programmable stitch, we need to find that little folder. We don't see it here. That's because you got to pull this little drag down bar so you can see it. The reason why you can't see it is because we are in the expert mode. When you're in the beginner mode, you can see it right away. But I'm always in the expert mode, so you'll have to pull down to find if you have a line around it. So when you click on that folder, you can choose any number of there's so many of them, or you can put in a programmable fill that you have created yourself in the Programmable Stitch Creator. We'll say okay, we'll try this one. And this is one I created. I forget why I needed this effect, but it came out okay. And it creates, and it never looks like what you think it's going to look like in realistic preview or when you sew it out. So let's go back to, I think this was the default. We'll say okay. Also, you can do a piping stitch. Now what the piping stitch does, it kind of gathers them in one area, and I think it really can create some really interesting effects. I wonder if all these are in the default. Yeah, they are. It shows you right here you can change the direction and have the points gather at different areas. Let's put the default back on. The next thing is the Motif Stitch, which is much like the Motif Stitch that we talked about for the line sew area. Looking for that folder once again, and you can change it to any number of different motif stitches. And as with the line stitch, you can change the size, but make sure you check the maintain aspect ratio box so that they decrease and increase proportionately. But let's put everything back in the default. Alright, the next is the cross stitch. And the cross stitch also you can change the size, and when you're doing embossed towels you're going to want to make that at least under 2 millimeters. Next is the concentric circle, and the concentric circle is different from the let's put the concentric circle. Don't want you to confuse the concentric circle with the spiral stitch. They're a little different, and I'll show you what the difference is. Number one is that the concentric circle is a true circle. It's always a circle, and you can change a circle that gets larger and larger and larger depending on how big your object is. But with the select point tool, if we use it, it's going to show us where the center is, and we can move this. But it still stays a true circle even though you're not seeing the other parts of it. You change the middle of it by using this select tool right here. So how does that differ from the spiral stitch? Well, the spiral stitch, you would think sometimes when you see it sewn out it looks the same, but the difference with this is you cannot change the circle. It always stays in the middle, and whatever object that it fills, even though it says it's a spiral, you see how it conforms to the shape of the object. The radial stitch also has an edit point that you can move around, and the stippling stitch, it's almost like a motif stitch, but it's not. It's a stippling stitch. We use that a lot in quilting applications. We do that by lowering the spacing, and if you look in this little box down here as I do it, you can see how it increases or decreases the size. We'll put that on I think the default is 5. And then there is the net fill stitch, which is kind of similar to the cross stitch but just kind of in a different direction, and the zigzag net fill stitch. And those are the basics of your region fill closed path